to you live from the Nasrec Expo Centre, where, of course, the ANC is holding its 6th National Policy Conference. That's ahead to their National Elective Conference taking place in December. I do have with me in our makeshift studio here at Nasrec, Febe Potgieter. She is the General Manager of the ANC. Febe, thank you very much for your time here on ENCA. Firstly, today you're discussing organizational renewal under, a lot of other policies that you have in your policy documents. Just, tell us exactly, your organizational renewal policies. Just outline them for us.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. What the organizational renewal document address is the fact that we have been talking about the challenges facing the ANC since 1997. The problem of corruption, the problem of factionalism within the ANC, and the fact that the movement is so inwardly looking that it doesn't pay sufficient attention to its core mission, which is how do you make sure that children have enough food to eat, that your infrastructure are maintained, that the lights are on, that you transform the economy. What we then drew attention to the fact that we've talked about this over the last, and I said since 1997, President Mandela in his political report first mentioned it. So we've talked about it over the years. And what we're saying to this policy conference is that the ANC, unless we address those issues and draw a line in the sand, the ANC faces an existentialist crisis.
Yes.
And part of that existential crisis is that declining electoral support. For the first time since 1994, we dipped below 50%. So we need to look at it. So there's a number of areas that we're looking at. For example, one of the areas that's on the table for discussion and being discussed within the commissions is the question about how do you define members in relation to the values of the organization. We can't have people as members who are rapists or convicted for rape or criminals, etc., or corruption for that matter. So we're looking at and discussing about how do you make sure that you address those kind of issues. The second issue is how do you ensure that your leadership election produce the best. And when we talk about the best, we're not just talking about educated people or rich people. We're talking about the fact that if you look at your cadre of public representatives, you need people that are lawyers, you need people that understand health, you need people that understand the economy, etc. But in addition to that, you also need people that understand how communities work. You need somebody that can represent the views of the LGBTQI, etc. So that's what we're talking about. So your cadre policy and how you then select your leadership is the other one. The third one is how do we deal with corruption? And that's a major issue. If you may recall that the 54th conference introduced what we call the step-aside rules.
It'll be in
and it was very deliberate. It was very deliberate to distinguish it from your disciplinary process, because your step-aside is aimed at, for example, there's an allegation against me that I am, have misappropriated funding. An impact on the integrity of the organization, whether I may have public office or I have office in the ANC. What the requirement is that you need to go to the Integrity Commission and say that, okay, I feel that I've been wrongly accused and XYZ are the reason for why I think I'm wrongly accused. The Integrity Commission will make a judgment call based on the facts presented to them, their own investigation, and then say that, okay, but still, we think you need to clear out your matter and then come back. When I'm being charged, the same applies. I haven't been found guilty yet, but there is something, and the question about step aside is the case across different organizations. If you go in business and your CFO is charged with embezzlement, I mean, there's no way that you can have that person continuing to do what they are doing. And I think that in a similar way, the ANC has introduced the step-aside rule to be able to deal with those issues. Discipline is a little bit slightly different. It's when there's evidence, you can then say that, okay, on the basis of this, we produce charges against you, and we can then take you through this formal process.
I just want to get other topics into our discussion, and also, the other issue also that you raise in your policy document, which, we'll give it to you. You're very good at basically realizing what what your problem is as the ANC. The issue is the implementation of these great policies that you come up with. And one of the things that you call yourselves as the ANC every time you talk about the ANC, you say non-racial, non-sexist, non-ageist, etc. But that's not necessarily what's been happening. Your DSG, who recently passed away, used to outright, even in public, especially in recent days, talk about how the non-racial part is not happening. At some point, President Thabo Mbeki, former President Thabo Mbeki, said that, you know, looking at the plenary, there's not a lot of color in that room.
No, absolutely. I think that one of the questions about renewal is, of course, those internal processes that I spoke to about earlier. But in addition to that, it's also making sure that the values of the ANC find expression both in what we say, both in form as well as in content. So we can't just say that we're a non-racial or non-sexist organization and it doesn't find expression in how we look. So non-racialism is certainly part of that, that we need to look at how do we renew ourselves. I mean, the ANC is the champion of non-racialism in this country. That's what the Freedom Charter set in the 1950s. If you look at the black consciousness movement of the 1970s, it said that we are all black people and therefore we share common oppression and we need to struggle together. And then also the 1980s. So we've got a long tradition for it. And when we talk about renewal of the ANC, we need to talk, we're talking about the fact that we need to go back to our core values of standing for everybody. So non-racialism is an important part of renewal, that we need to get it right and we need to refocus the organization on how do we make sure that we can become a home for everybody, but also not just non-racialism, but also all different classes. The middle class has doubled since 1994. But why is it that the movement that have fought for those positions does not reflect that? Similarly, the questions about age. We're talking about generational mix, but we have, you know, when we were talking about, you know, representatives for Parliament, we had to fight to make sure that, you know, there's a quota for young people of 25%. And then it got stretched a bit to people under the age of 40. But if you look at other countries, a 40-year-old is a prime minister. So I think that when we talk about renewal, we're talking about all of those issues, that we need to look at the values of the movement, we need to look at its capacity to implement the transformation agenda, and we need to look at the issues of, you know, making it more and a more effective organization. The gender question is another example. We've made advances as a country and as a movement. You know, in 1991, women walked out of the ANC conference because we were demanding 30%. In 2002, we introduced the 50-50 into our constitution. But you know, you take two steps forward, and then you need to look at how do you move forward from that point onwards. The issue that's being raised, and there's a group of young researchers that's looking at the ANC 1997, because what we did in 1997 was to do research about, you know, your PCs, your NECs, your regional executive committees, and the top 5 or 6. And the situation of women, if you have one woman at most, it's a problem.
Even so provincial, provincial chairperson, the executive is very less women.
But there was an interesting discussion in one of the commissions that I'm from now, where people were saying that, you know, if you look at the African Union Commission, it's in the rule of the AU Commission or the AU that if your chairperson of the commission is a man, then the deputy chairperson has to be a woman, or vice versa. Shouldn't we have a rule in the ANC, if your president is a woman, then your secretary general should be a man, or vice versa? So that you do make it possible for people to understand that you can't play with half your team, as we're doing at the moment.
You know, puts in danger sort of the rule of democracy, that I am allowed to, as a member, vote for who I think should be in that position. It also then
democracy is not absolute. I mean, it's like saying that in a country where for over 100 years you had preferential treatment for one tiny segment of your population, now you're saying they must compete on an equal basis. It doesn't work that way.
Let me bring in this. You know, you also say in your policy documents, obviously realizing that the electoral is not positive towards you anymore. It's getting worse, and the votes for the ANC are declining. You didn't get 50+1%, for instance, last year during the local government elections. And now 2024 is obviously going to be a very difficult year for the ANC elections-wise. Now, are you looking at maybe having a policy that will address the possibility, which is there, the possibility of having a coalition government on a national level?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at South African electoral system, we've had, even though we had a majority party in the form of the ANC, we've always had one form of coalition government or the other. I mean, in KZN, the ANC and the IFP at the beginning had a coalition. Since I can't remember exactly the year in the Western Cape, there was a point where there was a coalition between the ANC and the National Party. It's actually your Western Cape branches that are bringing up this. Yes. Yeah. So there's always been a discussion and an approach towards coalition governments. But let me just take it a step back about 2024. To say that if you look at the analysis of the 2019 elections as well as the 2021 elections, what has happened in terms of the electorate is that you have lower voter turnout and lower voter registration. The bulk of ANC supporters haven't voted for other parties. What they've done is that they've stayed at home.
Yes.
So in ANC strongholds, what you've seen is large-scale, people just stayed at home and said, we're disappointed with you. We're not yet prepared to vote for someone else, but we want to make us, give you a message that we are disappointed in you. So part of what we need to do is to address that question about, one, how do you address the concerns that people have? The question around what are we doing about the economy, getting the economy growing and addressing the question of unemployment. How do we fix education and health? Very basic thing. We had one of our delegates again in the commission talking about, it's somebody that have run public and private hospitals that's saying that we need to have an performance for people that's running our hospitals in terms of queuing times, in terms of the cleanliness of hospitals, in terms of the services that people receive. So in a sense, when we talk about the existential crisis that the ANC face, it's to be able to accept that, one, that we have a problem. And I think that we made the point in the presentation to plenary is that any alcoholic knows that it starts with admitting that I have a problem.
Yes.
And until such time that we admit that we have a problem.
I think you've been admitting for a while.
I think that we've admitting that there's a problem, but we're thinking that, I can take one drink and I'll be fine. I think that the reason why we're saying that we face an existential crisis is to be able to say that we need to go dry.
Yeah, I think that
this is the point that we are at the policy conference, to say that we can either draw a line and say that we need to do things differently and completely differently, or otherwise we're going to keep falling off the wagon.
So there's going to be a press briefing by your national spokesperson, Pule Mabe. So in between us speaking, I'm going to apologize and break us into that, but we still have a bit more time. You actually say in your policy documents, this is how you describe the ANC. You say the ANC is under mortal threat. These are documents from, for instance, your 54th national conference, where you started realizing this problem and calling it that. But I want to go back to making sure that the integrity of the ANC stays intact and holding each other to account. The cadre deployment issue came up in the Zondo Commission, where he called it unconstitutional. This, obviously, we know is a universal thing, the cadre deployment issue. It's a universal phenomenon. But I think with the ANC, the issue is how it's done.
Yeah.
And so are you going to look at it to, modify the cadre deployment issue?
I mean, I think that the principle, and it's also quite a hot issue for debate in all of our commissions. The issue about deployment is that if you have political parties, and you're right, it's a universal approach, that if you have political parties, part of what you need to do is to ensure that your policies get implemented. What has happened in the movement, and this is part of the rot that we're talking about, that we need to look at how do we address. What you have is that you don't deploy your best people. So you deploy someone in a position, and I don't know which example to use without because I think we need to focus on the principle rather than looking at individuals. So, for example, if it comes to a Director General of a particular department, you need to make sure that you have somebody that has the experience, that has the management skills, and that also understand why you're talking about decolonization of education, for argument's sake, and understand what we mean by that, but also how to make effect of it. We haven't done that. In a lot of circumstances in local government, we haven't done that. We haven't done that in some of our provincial departments, as well as some of our national departments. So part of what this policy conference need to look at is how do we then ensure that you get the best person for the job and that you then hold them accountable. So there is a debate about the cadre policy. I mean, one of the delegates made the point that in a municipality you have for more than a year, you don't have a municipal manager because the ANC structures can't agree about who should be the MM. And it's not about that they're thinking that the one person is more competent than the other. It's about, the
factions. Sometimes.
It's about the factions, but also who can exercise patronage on behalf of my particular grouping.